Go ahead, take it away.
Thank you so much. That was good timing.
Yeah, perfect.
I went around the building a couple of times, so forgive me. So I heard you did homework, is that right?
Yeah, they
Did some homework. So it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you on this fine Saturday afternoon. I do apologize for my tardiness. I just came from a school board meeting. We were talking about the role of education, in many ways in both your lives, but also the lives of our community more broadly. And as we think about these concepts of digital literacy, and as we think about what it means to be prepared for our own futures, I'm going to talk about it in the context of some of the work that I do, but I also want to talk about it as it relates to the opportunities that are out there in front of you. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza. I grew up both in Watts and Inglewood. I grew up in conditions that many of you may or may not recognize. My father was on drugs. My mom had gambling issues. We moved around quite a bit. But fortunately, because of amazing people and programs like this, I was able to make it to UCLA. I got to UCLA. I experienced a ton of culture. Yes, go Bruins. I experienced a ton of culture shock. I got there. I didn't know what it was like. I had never seen nearly as many white people before in my life. So I didn't really understand what the environment was like, what the community was like. So when I made it to UCLA, I struggled. Again, fortunately, because there were some amazing people there. Masai Mentors, a great counselor. Shelley Benton at the time, another academic counselor. They really helped me sort of move through. And in doing that work, I came to realize, or rather in pushing through, I came to realize that there was some value in not only me continuing to pursue my education, but in me exploring what that really means in this world today. So fortunately, I got to travel to South Africa, went and studied abroad, and when I landed in South Africa and I began to see some of the conditions that some other children were experiencing in South Africa, I realized that although I had grown up here in America with the challenges that I had grown up with, really I had grown up with a lot of privilege. That when I met some of the South African children that I came to love and respect and adore, that although they were in many ways very happy, some of them were living in shanty towns, which were these essentially shacks. At the time, they didn't have floors. They had aluminum covers. They were wooden shafts. So if you've ever seen like the favelas in Brazil or some pictures in certain places in Cuba, this is what it looked like. There was one public housing place we went to, and there was a one-bedroom apartment. And the one-bedroom apartment was about as big as from this wall to where I'm standing, all the way to that back wall. Kid you not. There were 18 families living in that one-bedroom apartment. And they had to rotate in and out throughout the day. And what that came to teach me as this 20-year-old kid who came from America, who grew up in Watts and Inglewood, was that I had power and that I had opportunity. Was that I had access to resources. That I had shoes, I had books, that I had family I could call upon and rely upon. And maybe not even family, but at least a teacher, a mentor, an organization that I can go to. And from that moment forward, I decided that I wanted to learn more about what this meant. I hadn't yet had language for it, but I realized that I needed to understand what this meant in my life. And so as I traveled around the country, I went to Robben Island, which is where Nelson Mandela was in prison for 18 years. He was in prison for 27 years, 18 on Robben Island, 9 in Pretoria. When I stood in his cell and I saw what this man was willing to give up all this time for his life, for the betterment and the freedom of his people, I knew then that the privilege I had in this society had to be used for something greater than just making money and driving a fast car.
All right.
So as I traveled around South Africa and I went to the Transvaal and I stood where Shaka Zulu fought off the British, I began to understand not only my connection to my power and my privilege, but my relationship as a person of African descent to the struggles of others around the world. I began to gain this sort of sense of global awareness.
All right.
And it was in understanding these struggles that I came back with a commitment to improve conditions here in my own community. So I'm going to fast forward years later. Served in the military, came back, got out, went around the world, served in Iraq, got out, and I went back to UCLA and worked to finish my degree and decided I want to focus on, again, improving conditions for folk who look like me, who came from conditions similar to the ones I come from. And in doing so, launched an organization that focused on helping to do that work, helping our young men who are more likely to go to jail, more likely to be incarcerated, or to go back to jail if they'd ever been, less likely to graduate, etc. Wanted to make sure that they had opportunities that I knew, in many ways, society didn't often allow for us to achieve. And so it was in the context of doing that work that I became committed to ensuring that young African American males and children more broadly, black and brown, Asian Pacific Islander, young men and women of color, could take advantage of the opportunities that existed here in this society, but also be able to utilize their privilege, not just for themselves, but for the benefit of their community. And it's in the context of understanding our privilege and our power and our responsibility, I'm going to connect it to this idea of digital literacy. So it was when working with these young men that we decided to understand what it was that was getting in our way, what it was that was getting in their way in their community. So they began to evaluate issues as it related to their education, issues as it related to their health, began to understand these concepts of food and food justice, what it meant to eat and live healthier lives. They would show up to school and they would have only $1. So they would go to their friend in school and they'd buy a hot bag of Cheetos for breakfast. How many of you have ever done that? Wow. Or they would get, as I did when I was growing up, we would get a bag of sugar and Kool-Aid and we'd have some gummy worms. Actually, we didn't have gummy worms back then. That was just too much. But we would get a bag of sugar and Kool-Aid, and sometimes they have the gummy worms or the sour punch straws or the long ones. How many of you have done that in the morning? Mm-hmm. Exactly. So we began to look at that and we said, well, wait a minute, what's going on in our community? Why is this our option? Because when I went to Beverly Hills and I went to Palisades and I went to these other communities, I realized they weren't doing that. They didn't have that. So then the young men began to research and evaluate what the conditions were, and they began to see that, oh, wait a minute. In Inglewood, we have 180 liquor stores and fast food restaurants compared to Santa Monica, where they have at least 80 full-service grocery stores. We have 112,000 people in the city of Inglewood, and there's only 89,000 in Santa Monica. Why are these conditions, why do they exist the way they exist? So they began to do research. They started Googling what was going on in Inglewood versus Santa Monica. They started doing some surveys in their community to talk to people and began to realize that there was a relationship between our choices and our opportunities. And it was an understanding that we didn't have that many full-service grocery stores in Inglewood, that we could only make choices, right, based on the opportunities that we had. So if our opportunities were limited, we're going to make limited choices. And if the opportunities we had were opportunities that were not good for us, then we were typically going to make decisions that were not in our own best interest because, well, frankly, that's all you could do. Yep. So as they began to understand this, they decided to report back on their findings. So they traveled up to San Francisco, went to a conference called the Digital Media Literacy Conference. And they told their story. They told the story of their findings. And they told the story of what they began to understand was this concept of food and nutrition and health, but its relationship to justice and equity. And as they told their story, they not only posted it on Facebook and posted it on Instagram, well, I don't know if Instagram. So they had Instagram. There was no Snapchat then. So it was on Instagram, it was on Facebook. They did do Vine. They did some things on Vine. Began to tell their story. They began to get people involved in these issues. And as they got people more involved in these issues, folk in the community started saying, hey, well, wait a minute, we need to wake up. How about we start building more school, community, and home gardens? How about we start advocating for more grocery stores? In fact, we need a farmer's market in Inglewood too. All right. So it's because of these young folk and their ability to understand the conditions in their community, to utilize their privilege and access within education and the power of their voice to facilitate change and then to help get that message out, not only through digital platforms, but in the community, that we've been able to facilitate change. So much so that we're now launching a farmers market in September of this year. These young folk made a commitment to build 100 school, community, and home gardens. We've now built 56. Right? So this is what it means to ultimately transform your community and to take advantage of the skill set that you're being provided in spaces like this so that you can do that work. It is incumbent upon us as members of these communities to not only rely upon institutions outside of our space to do the work for us, i.e. our government agencies or a corporation that maybe put a grocery store in our community, but instead to take responsibility for the environment that we have and to say, you know what? Enough is enough. We're going to do something about it. And as young folk, you all have not only the privilege, but you